Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivarajakacarya Ashtotra Shata Sri Mahis Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivinoda Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivarajakacarya Ashtotra Shata Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki Prem Sakha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gop Gopinath Shyamcandra Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Vrindavan Mathura Dham Ki मायापुर नवदीप धाम की गंगा माई यमुना माई की भक्ति देवी तुलसी महारानी की समवेत भक्त वृंद की गौर प्रेमानंदे all glorious assembled devotees, all glorious assembled devotees, all glorious assembled devotees, all glorious to Shri Guru and Gauranga Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki. Yeah, so we'll be reading from Krishna book today, discussing one of the pastimes of Lord Krishna. So the topic is deliverance of Shishupal. So this episode of Shishupal appears in the 10th canto, chapter number 74, but also in Krishna book, chapter number 74 as well. So as you all know, Shishupal, basically he is the son of Dhamaghosh and Shruta Shrava. Basically she is the sister of Queen Kunti. So Shishupal is is Krishna's cousin. So that is a relationship between Shishupal and Lord Sri Krishna. So as we all know that Shishupal basically he used to hate Krishna from the very birth. He used to always criticize Lord Krishna from the very childhood. But however, Lord Krishna gave a boon to his mother that he will tolerate 100 insults, and after 100 insults Krishna will take action. So that's a boon Shishupal's mother has received from Krishna. And Shishupal, we know that actually in the previous birth, who was Shishupal? Anyone knows who is Shishupal in his previous birth? He was Jay and Vijay. So Jay and Vijay, as we all know, the two doorkeepers, they were cursed by the 4 Kumaras, and as a result they have to take 3 births as enemies of Krishna. So this is the last birth for Jay and Vijay. So Shishupal and Dantavakra. So they are Jay and Vijay. So Shishupal is Jay, one of the doorkeepers. So the reason why I selected to discuss this pastime is because in the Bhakti Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami, he talks about 9 types of devotional service, and he was discussing about the power of natural attraction for Krishna. The power of natural attraction for Krishna. And he uses the example of Shishupal. So that is very unusual, right? I mean, if why would you take example of someone who is criticizing Krishna to explain the power of absorption in remembering Krishna? So that is a little bit unusual. So of course there are many reasons why he does that, and that's why I thought to discuss this topic for today, because this is not very elaborately discussed because I think this pastime was discussed by some of the previous speakers, but we didn't get time to kind of go in detail. So I thought that we can discuss in detail about this pastime. So what is so special about deliverance of Shishupal, and why was Jiva Goswami using this pastime to explain the power of absorption? Because as we all know, Shishupal, he used to always criticize Krishna, and then whenever he used to criticize Krishna, all the devotees who were present in the Rajasya Yajna also, they were all used to get hurt, that how can he be speaking so harsh words on Krishna. So anyway, so let's go into the pastime. This is This is a this is from the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 74, as I explained, said before. Present by the invitation of King Yudhishthira to participate in the great sacrifice were all exalted demigods, including Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and Indra, the King of Heaven, accompanied by their associates, as well as the predominating deities of higher planetary systems, including Gandharvaloka, Siddhaloka, Janaloka, Tapoloka, Nagaloka, Yakshaloka, Rakshasaloka, Pakshiloka, and Chandraloka, as well as famous kings and their queens, all the respectable sages, kings, and demigods who assembled there agreed unanimously that King Yudhishthir was quite competent to take the responsibility of performing Rajasuya sacrifice. No one was in disagreement of this fact. So just to give a little bit background of what's happening here, as you all know that King Yudhishthir, he was performing Rajasuya sacrifice. And that's the time, actually this Rajasuya sacrifice happened before Mahabharat war. It was happened before. So that's the time when all the Pandavas, they were in their capital city Indraprastha along with the elder brother Yudhishthir. And that's the time when Yudhishthir Maharaj wanted to perform this Rajasuya sacrifice. And the reason why this sacrifice is performed is basically, to assert the imperial, authority of King Yudhishthir, because there were many other kingdoms also. They were all kings, but along with the kings, there is king of all the kings, right? So that is Yudhishthir Maharaj. To ascertain his authority over all the kingdoms, that is the purpose of Rajasuya sacrifice. And before Rajasuya sacrifice happened also, if you remember, what happened is that there is Digvijaya conquest. Digvijaya conquest means before conducting this Rajasuya sacrifice, the four Pandavas, other than King Yudhishthir, they were sent in 4 different directions. They were sent in 4 different directions to to get the allegiance of all the kings in all the 4 directions, to agree that King Yudhishthir is the king of all kings. And whoever agreed, they used to pay, send their gifts as a support for Rajasuya sacrifice, and whoever didn't support, they used to wage a war and ultimately defeat them. So that happened. That is called as Digvijay conquest. And that's the time also we see this pastime of the killing of Jarasandha, the king of Magadha. That also happened during this time, before the Rajasuya sacrifice happened. So as you all know, Jarasandha, he captivated all the kings, and then he imprisoned all the kings, and he used to usurp all their kingdoms. And then that is when Arjuna and Bhima, they went, and along with the help of Krishna, they defeated Jarasandha, and they released all the kings. So now you have the allegiance of all the kings who were released by Jarasandha, by killing Jarasandha, and also the 4 Pandavas, they were traveling in 4 different directions to agree to this Rajasuya sacrifice. So now what happened is that they collect, there is actually a long list of all the items or the gifts collected from the different parts, and that all those things were used to cover the expenses for the Rajasuya sacrifice. Anyway, so that is a little bit background of the history of Rajasuya sacrifice. And as you can see here, who assembled there agreed unanimously that King Yudhishthir was quite competent to take the responsibility of performing the Rajasuya sacrifice. So that is when everybody agreed, then that is when Rajasuya sacrifice was actually started. And as the sacrifice proceeded, the ritual of first worship has to be performed, and the members of the assembly were called upon to decide who would receive this honor. Sahadeva spoke up, Sri Krishna, the Supreme Lord, is indeed the most exalted person, for he himself comprises all the deities worshipped by Vedic sacrifice. In his role as super soul in the heart, he arranges for everyone in the universe to engage in particular kind of work, and by his mercy alone, human beings can perform various kinds of pious activities and receive the resultant benefits. So just as any other worship, even in Rajasuya sacrifice, there is something called as Agra Puja. Agra Puja basically means that who will get the first respect or worship, right? So you need to select one person, and that's actually a Vedic tradition, because if you see, it is mentioned that there are so many kings, sages and demigods, including demigods, they were all invited to this Rajasuya sacrifice. And in the Vedic custom, it is, one has to treat, the guest as a god, right? Atiti Devo Bhava, because you need to give a proper respects to all the guests. And that is what is happening. King Maharaj Yudhishthir, when he invited all these guests, and he was he was treating all the guests especially equally. This is one more important thing. This is also a part of the Vedic culture, because when you have too many guests, we cannot make too much discrimination between them. That is actually not a healthy thing, because what happens is that when you make too much discrimination, then what happens? It's obvious, right? So that is why it is said that Maharaj Yudhishthir was treating all the guests equally. But however, even though you treat all the guests equally, but definitely when someone is very exalted, you definitely have to give a special respect and special attention. So that is what is the concept of Agra Puja. Agra Puja means you have to select one person, and this one person also should be someone who is unanimously accepted. It's not just that just you like somebody and then you select it, because then again that will create one more problem. That is why there is discussion, who will receive the first worship. And you can see here, Sahadeva proposed Sri Krishna should be receiving the first worship, and everybody agreed to that actually. Because ideally, if you look at that, generally, persons who are older, they are given the first worship. If you go by age, who is the oldest person in the assembly? Who is the oldest person in the Rajasuya assembly? It is King Bhishma Pitamaha, right? Ideally, Bhishma Pitamaha should be the one who should be receiving the Agra Puja. But you see, even Bhishma wanted actually Krishna to receive the Agra Puja. And that is why after the battle of Kurukshetra, there's a pastime of Bhishma Pitamaha lying on the bed of arrows, right? And there's an interaction with the Pandavas. Over there, even Bhishma Pitamaha actually recollects this incident, that in the Rajasuya sacrifice, actually even he wanted Krishna to receive the first Agra Puja. And anyway, so actually even this is a common custom, even in the temple over here also, when we worship, right? When we worship, we offer the arati, and then flower and everything, right? And what is the custom we follow? Right? I mean, first of all, after you show it to the deities, then you take to Srila Prabhupada, and after that you take to the senior devotees, and then you take it to the other devotees, right? So this is something, a part of the Vedic custom. There is nothing wrong with this kind of a thing. But however, one must always keep in mind that we should not unnecessarily create too much discrimination where a person develops envious feelings towards between each other. So that is why too much discrimination is not good. Of course, definitely some discrimination is required when you want to honor the exalted personalities, but that is something we need to keep in mind. And that is why Hari Bhakti Vilas, there is a statement in Hari Bhakti Vilas which states that in an assembly of devotees or in a fire sacrifice in the Yagashala, right, one should not offer different respects to different people. It's actually an offense to do that. The reason is because you are actually openly declaring that he is better than you, right? So generally it is not recommended. Even if you have to do, you select one person. Just like Sukadev Goswami, when he was presenting Bhagavatam, all the sages unanimously agreed to give the Vyasasan to Sukadev Goswami. So the unanimity is very much required. So in here also, everybody agreed except for Shishupal. Even that became a problem here, right? So now it goes on that one who worships him worships all living entities. Surely Lord Krishna should be worshipped first. Nearly everyone in the assembly agreed with Sahadeva's proposal and loudly congratulated him. Thus King Yudhishthir happily worshipped Lord Krishna. After bathing his feet, the king took the wash water and sprinkled it on his head, and his wives, younger brothers, ministers and relatives also sprinkled that water on their heads. Then everyone, then everyone shouted, all victory, and bowed down to Lord Krishna as flowers rained down from above. Shishupal, however, could not tolerate this worship and glorification of Sri Krishna. He stood up from his seat and harshly rebuked the wise elders for choosing Krishna to be worshipped first. After all, he said, this Krishna is outside the system of Vedic social and spiritual orders and the society of respectable families. He follows no principles of religion and he has no good qualities. Even as Shishupal continued to blaspheme him in this way, Lord Krishna remained silent. But many members of the assembly covered their ears and quickly left the hall. While the Pandava brothers raised their weapons and prepared to kill Shishupal, Lord Krishna stopped them from attacking, however, and instead used his Sudarshana disc to decapitate the offender. At that moment, an effulgent spark of light rose out of Shishupal's dead body and entered the transcendental body of Lord Krishna. Having lived through 3 births as the enemy of the Lord, Shishupal now attained the liberation of Sayujya, merging into him by dint of his constant meditation on him. So here this is something which is very amazing, or this is something which is also, you can say, unusual, right? So here you have Shishupal who is actually criticizing Krishna, right? Then how can someone who is criticizing Krishna merge in the body of Krishna? You understand the question I'm asking? So that is something which is very strange. And even Yudhishthir Maharaj, he was also very much puzzled when this happened, because Yudhishthir Maharaj also was there in the Rajasri assembly. And of course, in the 74th chapter, there is no much discussion why it happened, but actually this discussion was further elaborated in the 7th canto. In the 7th canto, 1st chapter. That is where Yudhishthir Maharaj asks Narada Muni that how is that Shishupal, the demon Shishupal, merged into the body of Supreme Personality of Godhead, even though he is extremely envious, right? And this Sayujya Mukti, see, even though we say that Sayujya Mukti, even Sayujya Mukti is not something simple, right? It is even the great yogis, even they strive very hard for many thousands of years even to attain the Sayujya Mukti. But here you have Shishupal, all he has done is just criticize Krishna, and now he got liberation. That how is this possible? See, we must understand, see, Yudhishthir Maharaj, he is actually a very knowledgeable person and he is a very wise person. If you remember, when there is this Yaksha Prashna also, right, actually it is Yudhishthir Maharaj who was answering all the 100 questions asked by that, by the demon or whatever you want to call it, right? So Yudhishthir Maharaj is a very knowledgeable and very wise person, but even Yudhishthir Maharaj is getting bewildered by this pastime, that how is that Shishupal merged into the body of Krishna? Because the general understanding is that, see, anyone who fails to immediately leave the place where he hears criticism of the Supreme Lord or his faithful devotees will certainly fall down bereft of his pious credit. If you remember, when Shishupal was criticizing Krishna in the Rajasri assembly, all the other kings left. You see, some kings left, and whoever is left, Pandavas, they wanted to kill Shishupal. So that is an appropriate action, because that's a recommendation also, because it is extremely sinful to criticize the Supreme Lord and his devotees, and definitely such a person will go to hell. But here that doesn't seem to be the case. Shishupal is not going to the hell, actually he is merging into the body of Krishna. So that is the question asked by Maharaj Yudhishthir to Narada Muni, and Narada Muni gives a response. And interestingly, Narada Muni's response is even more strange or even more mind-boggling than this pastime. What does Narada Muni say? The Narada Muni's response, actually Narada Muni's response is very, very important, because this is where Jiva Goswami spends a lot of time to establish some of the principles of Raganaga Bhakti. It's a very unusual example to select the Shishupal's example and to establish the Raganaga Bhakti, but he does that. And it is very difficult to understand Narada's response also. It is very mind-boggling to, if you hear his statements. He says, Narada Muni says, therefore, by enmity or by devotional service, by fear, by attraction or by lusty desire, by all of these or any one of them, if a conditioned soul somehow or the other concentrates his mind upon the Lord, the result is the same. For the Lord, because of his blissful position, he is never affected by enmity or friendship. See, our understanding is that, one has to perform bhakti, and bhakti has to be performed in favorable mode. Right? That is the definition of bhakti. Right? It has to be done in a anukulyena. That favorability should be maintained, and that is what is defining bhakti. But here you have Narada Muni, he is telling that you somehow or the other you put your mind on Krishna, even by enmity or by lusty desire also. I mean, enmity, fear, these are actually negative feelings. Actually, this is not really compatible with, bhakti. But here you have Narada Muni giving this response to Maharaj Yudhishthir's question that how is Shishupal entered the body of Krishna. And now he makes one more statement that is even more controversial. The next verse he says, by devotional service, one cannot achieve such intense absorption in thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as one can through enmity towards him. Yeah, this is too much, right? So here, of course, when he says by devotional service, what he refers is by Vaidhi Bhakti. That is what he is referring to. And here Narada Muni is telling that by devotional service one cannot achieve the same intensity as one will achieve by enmity towards Krishna. Right? I mean, so what is the recommendation here? Does it mean that we should all stop practicing Vaidhi Bhakti and we all become enemies of Krishna? Right? So this is something which is very mind-boggling and which is very difficult to understand. And of course, in generally, whenever we discuss this pastime of Shishupal, the most common reasons we give why Shishupal merged in the body of Krishna is because we say that whoever is killed by Krishna gets liberation. Like even Putana, right? Even she got liberation because she was killed by Krishna. And same thing is Shishupal. He was also killed by Krishna, right? So that is one of the reasons which we state, and that is true. But however, there are further certain nuances or a finer understandings in each pastimes. So that is where the commentary of acharyas becomes very much important to understand these pastimes, especially statements like this, because these statements actually doesn't make much sense if you just read it like that, because ultimately we must understand that the devotee's life, a practicing devotee's life, is nothing but a prayer, right? Our Mangalarti, when we come for Mangalarti, we are praying, right? And Guru Puja also we are praying, and when we are chanting also we are praying, right? When we are doing service also there's a prayer mood, right? So ultimately a devotee's life is full of prayer. And when you say prayer, prayer has three things. You have an object of prayer, means whom you are praying, and you have subject of prayer, who is praying, and there's a process of prayer, means how to pray. So one has to know all these three things properly, right? So same way here, we must, by understanding these pastimes, the goal is very simple. The goal is that we understand who is the object of our prayer, means Krishna, Lord Krishna and his qualities. By reading these pastimes, we get to understand his qualities even more. And by understanding the commentaries of the acharyas, we understand the proper way of prayer, right? So that is a goal. Whenever you are trying to understand these pastimes, of course, we can say that, okay, Shishupal was, criticizing and Krishna killed him, and because Krishna is God, so he went back to Mukti. I mean, that's good. That's great. But definitely, if we want to understand the finer aspects of these pastimes, then definitely we have to dive even much deeper. And especially to make sense of these kind of instructions, that too from a person like Narada Muni, definitely we need some guidance. So, just give me a second here. And then Narada Muni even further continues that many persons have attained liberation simply by thinking of Krishna with great attention and giving up sinful activities. This great attention may be due to lusty desires, inimical feelings, fear, affection, or devotional service. I shall now explain how one receives Krishna mercies simply by concentrating one's mind upon him. So there are 5 things here Narada Muni is telling to develop attraction to Krishna. And all these 5 look problematic. So the first thing is lusty desire. Can anyone give any example who developed attraction to Krishna by lusty desires? Who is the gopis? The gopis of Vrindavan, right? And who has developed attraction with inimical feelings? Shishupal. What about fear? Kamsa. Affection? By all the Vrishnis, the residents of Gokul, right? And by devotion basically here means that, he's talking about the sadhana bhakti, means all the practicing devotees, they also develop, the goal is to, develop the attraction to Krishna, right? So this is how Narada Muni is telling that one has to develop somehow or the other attraction to Krishna. And Prabhupada actually in his purport to this verse and also the previous verse, he makes a very interesting purport. I'm going to read that purport a little bit here. The essential point in this connection is that one should be fully absorbed in thoughts of Krishna 24 hours a day. There may be many devotees in Ragmarg, which is exhibited in Vrindavan. Especially for the conditioned soul, Narada Muni recommends that one somehow or the other be absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, for that will save one from the all dangers of material existence. Full absorption in thought of Krishna is the highest platform of Bhakti Yoga. So this is where basically the explanation of Raganuga Bhakti is coming into picture. Because see, all we have studied is about Vaidhi Bhakti, and Vaidhi Bhakti is very pretty straightforward and very clear. Follow the regulative principles, have a favorable this thing towards Krishna, and all those things are there. But the minute Raganuga Bhakti or an intense affection towards Krishna has developed, or when that topic is being developed, what is a qualification for Raganuga Bhakti? Explained by Srila Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. What is a qualification? No, not that one. There is a qualification for Sadhana Vaidhi Bhakti, and there is a qualification for Raganuga Bhakti. There are for the Vaidhi Bhakti it is Shraddha that is required. What is the qualification for Raganuga Bhakti? Greed, exactly. The intense desire or the greed, or the word Rupa Goswami uses is Lobha. Lobha, basically Lobha means greed, Lobha means also intense absorption. They all kind of follows the same category. So sometimes what happens is that, we kind of see that whenever we discuss about the Raganuga Bhakti, it apparently appears that it kind of overrides the principles of Vaidhi Bhakti, right? You can see it very clearly. Right? It is kind of overriding the principles of Vaidhi Bhakti and heavily emphasizing on somehow or the other developing this deep attraction for Krishna, even with enmity feelings. That's all right. It's an extreme example, right? So anyway, the point here is not that we have to develop negative feelings or enmity towards Krishna. The whole point is that to develop that intense absorption. That is the whole message here. Because that is why here that is why Narada Muni is telling it is even greater than Vaidhi Bhakti. Why is that? Because in Vaidhi Bhakti what happens is that a person may be performing devotional service, but he may not really have any feelings or emotions. He may be just performing as a matter of duty. He may be just doing it like that, like mechanically. So definitely that's not the goal. The goal is ultimately to develop an emotional attachment to Krishna, right? And that is the focus of this message. Right, so that is why these kind of statements are made, and so the thing is to glorify this intense absorption even in the mood of enmity is praised ultimately, because it ultimately results in absorption of Krishna. And then devotees like Vasudeva and Devaki, who have natural mood of parental affection towards him, that what to speak about them, right? They are even intensely absorbed in a positive feelings. So it is just to kind of make a contrast that these kind of statements are made. And of course, Narada Muni also gives some more reasons in this regard to Yudhishthir's questions. Basically, he says that, see, Shishupal may be criticizing Krishna, right? But we must understand that this criticism, praise, honor, disrespect, this is only for material body, right? And a person who is identifying with this material body, because he is in this duality, dvandva mode, right? The mode of duality, he is getting affected by this praise and disrespect. But Krishna is beyond duality, right? And Krishna is Purusha. And whatever this praise and all these things, they are Prakriti. Prakriti can never affect Purusha, right? Instead Purusha affects Prakriti, but Prakriti can never affect Purusha. So this is one more reason Narada Muni gives. And Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur even further, but of course someone can ask a question, okay, if Krishna is not getting affected, then why did he kill? Right? Why, if you are not getting affected, then just move on, right? He may be criticizing, then why do you have to kill Shishupal? So over there Narada Muni gives two reasons. The first reason is definitely for his own benefit, because ultimately when you kill Shishupal, he got liberation. So it is definitely for his own benefit. And the other reason what he gives is that, see, you can see that all the other devotees are getting disturbed by his behavior, and they are getting pained, and they are even leaving the Rajasuya sacrifice, right? So that is why, for the sake of other devotees of Krishna, so that is why he killed Shishupal. This is one reason, some reasons Narada Muni gives in the 7th canto, 1st chapter. And actually Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur further comments on this criticism, that how this criticism is different, or different categories of criticism. That's what he kind of delves further into his purports. And where he says that, this criticism can be of two types. The criticism can be done in a favorable way with devotion, or it can also be done in an unfavorable way without devotion. Does anyone remember any favorable criticism by any of the devotees of Krishna? Any example of favorable criticism done by some of the Krishna's devotees towards Krishna? There are so many actually in this regard. So the famous one is Brahmara Gita, the song for the bumblebee, where Srimati Radharani, she was heavily criticizing Krishna when for the bumblebee. So that is one pastime of this criticism in a favorable or devotional mood. And there are criticisms which are done very unfavorably or without devotion. And of course he further goes into with absorption, without absorption, all those details. We don't have time to discuss all these things, but I want to mention here. And Shishupal falls in the category of unfavorable with absorption, because if you see, Shishupal was always thinking of Krishna, even though negatively, he was fully absorbed in Krishna conscious, in remembering Krishna. Anyway, so these are some of the other things, if someone wants to go even deeper into this, understanding this pastime. But now the thing is, now what is us? What is the lesson for us, right? By reading these pastimes. Now, for an ordinary person, now should he give up and develop this negative, feelings towards Krishna and become enemy of Krishna? So, there is one example in this regard. See, if Narada Muni is really telling that you have to develop enmity towards Krishna and that's how you develop absorption, there is one example which does not work. This principle does not work. Does anyone remember any pastime in Srimad Bhagavatam who was heavily criticizing Krishna and he never got liberation? Any example you remember? It is King Vena. King Vena, if you remember, he was also very critical of the Supreme Lord, and he was even telling that you should worship me instead to all the Brahmanas, right? So if really that is a criteria, then why did King Vena, why he did not get liberation? No, he didn't get liberation, right? So that's not the point. The point is that the important lies in the absorption and not in the process or the means to achieve it. It is also because of such absorption that Raganuga Bhakti is praised over Vaidya Bhakti. Therefore, the devotion to Krishna following the mood of the residents of Vrindavan or Vraja is superior to any forms of Vaidya Bhakti. Because see, ultimately, we must also remember that, see, whenever we use this word Raganuga Bhakti, people have a misunderstanding of Raganuga Bhakti. They think that Raganuga Bhakti means now they have to go to any, like Vrindavan and, kind of leave a secluded place and, perform or read some, very intimate pastimes of Krishna. That is not necessarily Raganuga Bhakti. Raganuga Bhakti doesn't mean that you change what you're doing. You still continue whatever you're doing, but now you have developed feelings and emotions towards your service to the Supreme Lord and to the devotees. That is the real meaning of Raganaga Bhakti, right? So that is the whole purpose, because we may be doing our activities or our service, but the real progress is when we emotionally absorb ourselves in remembering Krishna. That is ultimate success. That is when a Vaidhi Bhakti becomes Raganaga Bhakti. But the activity may still remain the same. You may be still distributing books, or you may be still doing a pujari service, or you may be still doing whatever service you regularly do. But now your absorption and your emotions are getting further refined, or it's increasing to an extent where it's almost on the level of the prema or raganga platform. So that is ultimate goal, and that is the whole message of these kind of pastimes or this kind of an understanding, right? And for a sadhaka to develop this kind of an emotional absorption in Krishna, that is why we have so many recommendations, right? Accept a spiritual master. Just like Srila Prabhupada, if you see, Srila Prabhupada took his instruction, the instruction from his spiritual master, as a life and soul, right? And he was fully invested and emotionally invested in his mission to please his spiritual master, right? He's not doing something mechanically. It's not that, okay, I'm supposed to do this, I'm doing this. No, he was emotionally and psychologically fully invested and absorbed in performing his service towards his spiritual master. And in this way, one has to gradually advance in the path of bhakti, in developing these relationships and becoming more emotionally absorbed in pleasing one's Guru and Krishna. So that is a real import that we should be learning or taking away when we read these kind of pastimes, and when we try to understand the controversial, so-called controversial statements by Narada Muni. Okay, so I like to end my class here. Any comments or questions? Nothing? Thank you all very much. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.